Every machine has a rhythm, a demand. In the heart of the day shift, the factory floor screams with this energy. It is a place of ceaseless input and undeniable output. But energy, like water, will always find the easiest route. For Mark, that route was evasion. He was a master of surface performance. He knew how to stand just so, how to move slow enough to appear diligent, yet fast enough to avoid true effort. He logged hours, but he did not log work. The cost was hidden, absorbed by the system, invisible to the noise. But the system always keeps a ledger. The idle status on his machine was more than a technical readout. It was a character assessment. It marked a refusal to engage, a deep-seated contempt for the fundamental pact of labor. You give effort, you receive worth. He believed time was his enemy. He treated it with scorn. He did not realize that time is only the field where consequences grow. In the midst of the day's roar, there was one constant, quiet observer, Karen. She was not loud. She did not chase mistakes. She had simply learned to see the difference between motion and work, between sweat and pretense. Her sight was a form of industrial X-ray. She watched Mark, not with anger, but with the cold, clear sight of a professional assessing a structural fault. His failure was not a moral failing to her. It was a physical inefficiency she would eventually have to correct. Her authority was quiet, unshakable, and backed by years of standing on a concrete floor. Mark's deception was thin. He would push papers, wipe a spot already clean, fiddle with controls that required no adjustment. He thought the complexity of the machinery disguised his apathy. It did not. To Karen, the pretense was worse than the absence. It was a failure of professional integrity. She understood that the slack he took, the duty he dismissed, was eventually transferred. It always comes due. In the factory, debts are paid in labor. She did not need to consult policy manuals or call HR. Her decision was rooted in the ethics of the place itself. Firing Mark would solve one problem, but it would teach no lesson. She chose a harder path for them both. The sharp, decisive movement of her pen on the form was the only sign of the consequence being finalized. It was a commitment to education through uncompromising reality. The interaction was brief. No shouting, no theatrics. The only sound was the continuous grind of the day's work around them. Karen stood before him, calm. Mark, surprised, offered a weak, defensive protest. She ignored the words. She only delivered the sentence. You're back here at 11 p.m. tonight. Second shift, with me. The consequence was immediate effort, not removal. His confusion and initial annoyance were visible. The shock of realizing his actions had, finally, generated a consequence he couldn't talk his way out of. The yellowed time card was the only artifact of the decree. The time 11 p.m. was stark, definite, unforgiving. It represented a vast, empty stretch of the day Mark believed he owned. He had to give it back. The card was proof that the simplest measure of responsibility is showing up when the standard is set. The ink held the weight of the new standard he was now bound to. Mark walked home through the industrial park, the late afternoon traffic blurring past him. He felt annoyance, resentment, and a faint, unsettling fear. He was used to authority being angry or loud. He was not used to it being coldly logical. The shadows were sharp and long, the only companions to his forced reflection. He was angry at Karen, but the true root of his frustration was the sudden loss of control over his own time. He had to pay the debt. At 11 p.m., the factory floor is transformed. The clamor of production is gone. The human energy is drained out of the air. It is replaced by the silent, rhythmic hum of the machinery's cooling. and the low, persistent sound of the building settling. It is a place where only truth remains. The vast, dark space felt huge, intimidating, a silent cathedral of industry. Mark was walking alone, dwarfed by the landscape, stripped of the distractions that buffered him during the day. This was the raw, unadorned reality of his workplace. Karen was waiting. No greeting, no lecture. She handed him the supplies, a heavy broom, thick gloves, and a bag of rags. She did not explain why he was there. She merely handed him the tools. The message was physical, not verbal. She was waiting for the factory itself to deliver the lesson. The work was simple but immense. The cleanup Mark had avoided for weeks. The oil spills, the scattered shavings, the hidden grime. It was the debt of neglect made manifest. The first hour was brutal. The broom felt heavy. The grime was resistant. The silence magnified every scraping sound, every grunt of effort. Mark's body rebelled instantly against the foreign concept of sustained, honest effort. He was sweeping a huge, empty section of the floor, the dust cloud rising like a visible protest in the harsh light. Karen was a few feet away, working with smooth, tireless efficiency. She was not supervising. She was demonstrating. Her silence was louder than any lecture. It set a standard that could not be debated. The discipline of the second shift is unique. It is administered not by a person, but by gravity, friction, and muscle fiber. Every movement is met with an equal and opposite force of resistance. For Mark, this resistance was a revelation. He felt the sharp protest in his lower back, the burning in his shoulders, the raw friction on his hands. He realized he was not fighting the factory. He was fighting his own wasted potential. This was the price of the shortcuts. Each sweep of the broom was an inch of the debt being repaid. The philosophy of the factory is simple. You cannot fake weight. The weight of the oil drum, the weight of the debris, the weight of the broom. It all had to be moved by his hands, and his alone. This was pure consequence. Undiluted. Inescapable. The friction broke the skin. The sweat turned to stinging salt. The hands Mark used all day for effortless distraction were now brutally engaged in the hard geometry of labor. The blisters were the factory's final warning. The consequence physically etched onto his skin. He gripped the rough wooden handle of the tool, the pain serving as a relentless physical teacher. This was the moment the body disciplined the mind. He could no longer think about being annoyed. He could only think about survival, about the next sweep, the next minute. The truth of the work was written in the grit under his nails and the raw heat in his palms. While Mark wrestled with the broad strokes of failure, Corinne addressed the details. She was meticulously cleaning a small, complex part of a machine Mark had routinely ignored. Her work was quiet, focused, and precise. She wasn't angry. She was merely upholding the unyielding standard of the profession. She understood that a small piece of ignored grime today is a mechanical failure tomorrow. Integrity is in the detail. She set the example of relentless accountability, demonstrating that true respect for the job means respecting every single overlooked component. As the hours ground on, the silence began to work its change. Mark had always associated work with noise, crowds, and supervision. The second shift was defined by their absence. He began to understand that noise covers mediocrity. Silence demands perfection. In this dark, quiet space, he could see the contours of his own sloppiness. He saw how his small, meaningless shortcut during the day created a huge, necessary burden for the night. The thought wasn't a punishment. It was a simple, mathematical realization of ethical debt. Respect, he was learning, is not a feeling conveyed by a manager. It is a physical reality measured by how clean you leave the space for the person who follows you. It is earned through the expenditure of the very effort you tried to hoard. Asterisk. At some point past 3 a.m., the exhaustion became a physical wall. Mark slumped against a cold steel pillar, panting. He looked at the vastness of the work still remaining. He wanted to quit. He wanted the easy way out. But the easy way out was the reason he was here. The immense physical defeat forced him to look past his annoyance and into the deeper truth. He was weak because he had chosen to be lazy. The cold steel of the pillar offered no comfort, only a solid, uncompromising presence. Asterisk. In a brief, mandated pause, Karen sat down, offering him a metal mug of black coffee. This was the only moment of reprieve, the only time the silence was allowed to be broken by human conversation. Her words were not harsh, but simple and direct. "We do this, Mark, because the person on the next shift deserves a machine that works, a space that is safe. Responsibility is not about you. It's about the pact you make with everyone else who works here." Asterisk. She explained that the discipline was not to punish the past, but to protect the future. Her tone was soft but unwavering. She shared no emotional story. She only spoke about the necessity of the standard. Mark, utterly exhausted, listened intently. The physical burn in his muscles had stripped away his defensive ego, leaving him raw and open to the truth. He realized her authority was derived not from her title, but from her willingness to perform the same painful, uncompromising standard herself. The rest of the shift was different. The pain was still there, but the resistance was gone. Mark's movements became practiced, stronger, more economical. He was finding the flow state of discipline, the quiet satisfaction of performing a task correctly, regardless of who was watching. The sweat and grime were no longer marks of shame. They were the proof of his effort, the physical record of his integrity. He was now operating on the standard, not against it. Asterisk. At 5 a.m., the work was finished. The floor was immaculate. The vast factory floor, now clean and orderly, was a testament to the order they had created. The dawn light was barely visible through the high windows, mixing with the yellow lamps, illuminating a scene of quiet, profound peace. Mark and Karen stood side by side, silent. He was utterly spent, but the exhaustion was clean. He had repaid the debt. He saw the value of the space for the first time. Mark returned for the day shift. The change was not in his clothes, but in his posture. He was upright, focused, and walked with purpose. He went straight to his workstation and began his work meticulously, no longer drifting. He performed his tasks with deliberate, quiet precision. The lessons of the long night were embedded in his muscle memory. He had internalized the discipline. It was now his own. Asterisk. Later that day, Karen saw Mark working. She did not approach him. She did not need to. She saw the standard reflected in his effort. She gave him a single, clear nod of acknowledgement from across the floor, the highest form of validation in their world. His face, though still tired, showed quiet pride and earned respect. The lesson was complete. He had been taught that authority is the necessary pressure that forges character, and that respect is the echo of effort.